My child, do not leave this message yet. There is something I need to show you about the person your heart has been trying to understand. You thought the distance meant they were moving away. You thought the silence meant they had stopped caring. And perhaps the most painful thought of all was that the connection you felt was something you had imagined alone. But what if I told you that the moment you thought the story was ending, something had already begun behind the scenes? Something they did not tell you. Something they were not even ready to admit to themselves. Tonight, I want you to see the moment when they finally began asking the question they had been avoiding. They were alone when it happened. Their phone was lying beside them. Your name was still in their mind. And after staring at the screen for several minutes, they opened your conversation. They did not send a message. Instead, they scrolled upward. Past the last conversation. Past the words they wished they had said differently. Past the moment when everything between you became complicated. And then they stopped at one particular message. A message you probably considered insignificant. But to them, it carried a meaning you never knew. They read it again. Then again. And something inside them broke open. Because they suddenly realized that the person they had been trying to forget was not disappearing from their heart. You were becoming harder to ignore. But there was something else. They were not only asking themselves whether they loved you. They were asking something much more frightening. What if this is the person I was supposed to recognize? That question frightened them. Because if the answer was yes, then they could no longer pretend that walking away had solved anything. And my child, this is where you need to listen carefully. I am not bringing you this story merely to tell you that someone loves you. There is a deeper truth here. You have been looking for your soulmate as though your soulmate must arrive like a stranger at the perfect moment. But sometimes the greatest revelation is realizing that the person you were waiting to meet was already standing somewhere inside your story. You simply did not know what their presence meant. And neither did they. Not yet. Because before they could recognize you, they had to lose the illusion that they could live peacefully without facing what their heart kept bringing back. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because the moment you think this story started is not where it actually began. 3 months earlier, they had walked into a small cafe after a difficult day. They had not planned to stay. They only wanted somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody knew them. Somewhere they could sit alone, drink something warm, and forget about the decision they had been trying to make. They were considering leaving their current life behind. A different city. A different job. A different beginning. And they had convinced themselves that starting over would be easier than confronting what their heart kept bringing back. Then you walked in. You did not notice them immediately. You were looking down at your phone, distracted by something happening in your own life. You ordered your drink. You stepped aside. And for a moment, nothing happened. No dramatic sign. No perfect coincidence. Just two people standing in the same room. But they noticed you. And something about that moment stayed with them. They could not explain why. They only remembered the way you looked when you thought nobody was watching. They remembered the quiet expression on your face. They remembered that you seemed present and distant at the same time. And strangely, they felt as though they had seen that expression before. Not your face. Your feeling. The feeling of someone carrying more than they were willing to say. They watched you leave. And they forgot about it. Or at least they tried to. Because life continued. Days passed. Then weeks. And eventually, you crossed paths again. This time, you spoke. It was ordinary. A simple conversation. A few words. Nothing that either of you could have pointed to and called destiny. But sometimes, my child, the moments that change a life do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly. And you only understand their importance after everything else has happened. That conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet when they walked away from you, they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not excitement. Not obsession. Peace. And that frightened them more than attraction ever could. Because attraction can be dismissed. Peace is harder to explain. They went home that night and told themselves it meant nothing. They said they were tired. They said they were imagining things. They said they were simply lonely. But the next morning, you were the first person they thought about. And that was the first crack in the wall they had built around their heart. Still, they resisted. They had reasons. Real reasons. They had been hurt before. They had trusted someone who betrayed them. They had opened their heart once and spent a long time regretting it. So when something genuine began appearing again, their instinct was not to move closer. Their instinct was to run. And that is why their behavior confused you. One day they were warm. The next day they were distant. One conversation felt effortless. The next felt strangely cold. You wondered whether you had done something wrong. You wondered whether they had changed their mind. You wondered whether the connection had only existed in your imagination. But I saw what you could not see. They were not fighting you. They were fighting what they felt for you. And those are two very different battles. There was a night when they almost told you everything. You remember the conversation. Perhaps you thought it was ordinary. They asked questions they normally would not ask. They wanted to know what you believed about love. What kind of person you trusted. Whether you believed people could meet at the wrong time. Whether you thought two people could care deeply for each other and still be afraid to begin. You answered honestly. They listened. But there was one question they wanted to ask and could not. Would you still choose me if you knew everything? They never said it. Instead, they changed the subject. And you let the moment pass. But they carried that unanswered question home. That night, they opened their phone. They typed your name. They started writing a message. I need to tell you something. They stopped. Deleted it. Started again. I don't know what is happening to me. Deleted it. Again. I think I have been running from you. Deleted. Then finally they put the phone down. And whispered something to themselves. Something they had never admitted before. I think I am afraid because this one actually matters. My child, understand this. The person who is meant to walk beside you will not always recognize the connection immediately. Sometimes they recognize the feeling first. Then the fear. Then the possibility. And only later do they recognize the person. That is what was happening to them. But there was still something standing between you. Their past. Someone from their past had recently returned. Not because that person was their future. But because old wounds often return just when someone is preparing to step into something new. That person reminded them of everything they had already survived. They brought confusion. Guilt. Old promises. Old memories. And for a brief period, your soulmate began wondering whether going backward would be safer than moving forward. You never knew about this. You only saw the distance. You saw the delayed replies. You saw the uncertainty. And perhaps you concluded that someone else had won their heart. But the truth was more complicated. The person from their past knew how to trigger their fear. You knew how to make them feel seen. And they did not yet understand why the second one frightened them more. Because being seen means being vulnerable. And vulnerability requires courage. Then came the night everything changed. They met the person from their past one final time. They expected closure. Instead, they heard a sentence that shook them. You were never really in love with me. You were just afraid to be alone. They became silent. Because somewhere inside, they knew it was true. They had mistaken familiarity for love. They had mistaken history for destiny. They had mistaken pain for depth. And suddenly, another face appeared in their mind. Yours. Not because they were trying to think about you. Because you were the first person who came to mind when they imagined peace. That realization followed them home. And that was when they opened your conversation again. The same conversation from the beginning of this story. They found that old message. The insignificant message you had forgotten. And suddenly they understood why it had stayed with them. You had said something simple. Something about not wanting anyone to choose you out of fear of being alone. You wanted someone to choose you because they were free to walk away and still decided to stay. They read those words again. And they began to cry. Because they realized they had been doing exactly the opposite. They had been keeping you close enough to feel safe, but far enough away that they would never have to risk being hurt. And my child, that is when they finally understood what they were losing. Not merely a relationship. Not merely a possibility. They were losing the chance to be known by someone who had never demanded that they become perfect before being loved. But there was still one question. Were you really the person meant for them? Or were you simply the person who arrived at the right moment and awakened something they needed to heal? They needed an answer. And that answer would come in an unexpected way. The following morning, they found an old photograph. It had been sitting inside a drawer for years. They almost threw it away. Then they noticed something in the background. A place. A familiar place. The same place where they had first crossed paths with you. They stared at the photograph. They checked the date. Years before they had ever met you. They had been there before. You had been there before. Not together. But in the same place. At different times. And suddenly, the coincidences began to feel impossible to ignore. The same cafe. The same street. The same annual event. The same strange connection to a place neither of you had considered important. But I do not want you to misunderstand this. The photograph was not proof that every detail of your future had been written like a script. It was something more meaningful. It showed them how often life had placed pieces of the story near them before they were emotionally ready to understand what those pieces meant. And that realization changed the question. They stopped asking, "Are they my soulmate?" And began asking, "Why did meeting them make me want to become a different person?" That was the real revelation. Because a soulmate, in this story, was not simply the person who made their heart race. It was the person who forced them to confront the version of themselves that could no longer survive. You did not enter their life to complete them. You entered their life and made it impossible for them to keep pretending they were complete while living behind fear. That is why your connection felt different. That is why they could walk away from others and feel relief, but walk away from you and feel unfinished. That is why they tried to replace the feeling. That is why they became distant. That is why they returned. And that is why their silence was never as simple as it looked. But there is one more thing you need to know. They are still afraid. Recognition does not automatically create courage. Understanding does not automatically create action. They can know what they feel and still hesitate. They can miss you and still remain silent. They can love you and still fear rejection. And this is where your story becomes different. Because you have been tempted to chase the answer. To look for signs. To analyze every message. To wonder whether every coincidence means something. But I do not want you trapped in that cycle. If this person is truly meant to share your life, you will not have to destroy your peace trying to force them toward you. Their choice must become their choice. Their courage must become their courage. Their confession must come from them. And that is exactly what began happening. A few days later, they sat in their car outside your building. They had been there for almost 20 minutes. Their phone was in their hand. Your name was on the screen. They had written the message. This time, they did not delete it. They stared at it. Then they whispered, "What if they don't feel the same?" That was the final wall. Not the past. Not another person. Not distance. Rejection. They were afraid that after everything they had finally understood, you would tell them that it was too late. They were afraid you had already moved on. They were afraid they had waited too long. And perhaps you would have understood that fear if you could have seen them sitting there. Because they were not the confident person you imagined. They were trembling. They were rehearsing what to say. They were imagining every possible response. Then something happened. You stepped outside. They saw you. And for a moment, neither of you moved. You did not know they had been sitting there. They did not know what you were thinking. But their entire body went still. Because suddenly, all the questions they had been carrying became one simple choice. Run, or finally tell the truth. They stepped out of the car. They walked toward you. And you could see something different in their face. Not certainty. Courage. They stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, they said nothing. Then they looked at you and spoke the words they had rehearsed for weeks. "I've been trying to convince myself that what I feel for you isn't real." You said nothing. They continued. "But every time I tried to walk away, I realized I wasn't becoming free. I was becoming afraid." Their voice shook. "I don't know what the future is supposed to look like. I don't know whether you will forgive me for the distance. I don't know whether you still want me in your life." They took a breath. "But I know one thing." They looked directly into your eyes. "I don't want fear making this decision for me anymore." And my child, that was the moment the story finally became honest. Not because they said the perfect words. Not because a miracle suddenly solved everything. But because they finally stopped hiding. And perhaps this is the part you needed to hear most. You may have been asking me, who is my soulmate? As though I should simply give you a name. A face. A sign. A guaranteed future. But sometimes the deeper revelation is not the name. It is the character. Your soulmate is not merely the person who gives you butterflies. Your soulmate is not simply someone who looks perfect beside you. Your soulmate is not the person who keeps you constantly confused and calls that intensity love. Look deeper. The person who belongs in your life will eventually have to meet you in truth. They will have to choose honesty over games. Courage over avoidance. Peace over chaos. Commitment over temporary excitement. And if someone has entered your life and awakened those things in you, pay attention. Not because every strong connection is automatically destiny. But because sometimes a person becomes significant not by completing your life, but by revealing what your heart will no longer accept. And there is something else I want you to release. Stop believing that you must become more beautiful, more successful, more perfect, or more desirable before someone can choose you. The right person will not require you to perform for love. They will recognize your value while still seeing your imperfections. And if this person is truly part of your story, they will eventually have to recognize that too. Their journey is not yours to control. You cannot heal their wounds for them. You cannot make their decision for them. You cannot force their courage. You can only remain faithful to the truth inside your own heart. And perhaps that is why I allowed you to hear this story now. Because you have been trying to solve a mystery that was never yours to solve. You wanted to know what they were thinking. I want you to remember what you are worth. You wanted to know whether they would return. I want you to understand that you should never have to beg someone to recognize your value. You wanted to know whether they were your soulmate. I want you to watch what they do with the truth once they recognize it. Because words can be beautiful. But choices reveal the heart. And their next choice will tell you more than every sign ever could. There will come a moment when they have to decide. Stay hidden, or step forward. Keep pretending, or confess. Protect the past, or build something new. And when that moment arrives, you will not need to chase them into it. You will know. Not because the universe sends you 100 mysterious signs, but because their actions will finally become impossible to misunderstand. There will be no need to decode every message. No need to wonder why they disappeared. No need to convince yourself that silence is secretly love. They will communicate. They will show up. They will make their intentions clear. And when they do, my child, let their actions speak louder than your fears. Because the person who is truly ready for you will not ask you to live forever in uncertainty. They will give you clarity. They will give you effort. They will give you a reason to trust again. And perhaps this is where the story takes its deepest turn. Because the person sitting across from you that day was not the same person who had first walked away. They looked the same. They sounded the same. Their hands still trembled when they were nervous. Their smile was still familiar. But something inside them had changed. They were no longer asking, "How do I protect myself from getting hurt?" They were beginning to ask, "How do I stop hurting someone because I am afraid?" That is a completely different question. And sometimes, my child, that is how you recognize a person who is finally ready for love. Not because they suddenly become fearless, but because fear stops being their excuse. After that conversation, neither of you tried to define everything immediately. There was no dramatic promise. No perfect declaration about forever. You simply began again. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. And at first, it felt strange. Because you had become accustomed to uncertainty. You had learned to read between their messages. You had learned to notice changes in their tone. You had learned to protect yourself before they could disappoint you. Now they were doing something unfamiliar. They were explaining themselves. If they were busy, they told you. If something bothered them, they said it. If they needed space, they did not disappear. And when they missed you, they said so. The difference was small from the outside. But inside the relationship, it was enormous. You were no longer trying to decode their heart. They were finally letting you see it. And one evening, several weeks later, you were walking together when they suddenly stopped. You asked, "What happened?" They looked at you. "I realized something." "What?" They smiled. "I spent so much time wondering whether you were my soulmate that I forgot to ask whether I was becoming someone worthy of being yours." You became quiet. Because that was the question they had needed to ask from the beginning. Not, "Are you the one?" But, "Am I ready to love the one I may have been given?" And my child, that is a question I want you to remember. Because many people spend years asking for the right person. Very few spend enough time becoming the right kind of person. They ask for loyalty while remaining inconsistent. They ask for honesty while hiding their own truth. They ask for patience while refusing to heal. They ask for someone emotionally available while remaining emotionally unavailable themselves. But love cannot survive on demands alone. It requires transformation. And your soulmate was beginning to understand that. They were not becoming perfect. They were becoming honest. There is a difference. One night, they told you something they had never told anyone else. They said, "I used to think my soulmate would save me from my past." You listened. They continued. "But now I think the right person makes me brave enough to stop living inside it." That sentence stayed with you. Because suddenly, you understood why their connection with you had felt so unusual. You had not rescued them. You had not healed them. You had simply made it impossible for them to keep pretending they did not need to heal. And perhaps that is what a meaningful connection does. It does not always make your life easier. Sometimes it makes your truth harder to avoid. You began changing too. You stopped checking your phone every few minutes. You stopped wondering whether their silence meant rejection. You stopped creating stories in your mind when you did not have facts. You learned to let their actions speak. And as you did, something beautiful happened. The relationship became quieter. Not weaker. Quieter. There was less anxiety. Less guessing. Less emotional chaos. More peace. More laughter. More ordinary moments. And those ordinary moments became the proof. One Saturday afternoon, you were sitting together doing absolutely nothing important. They were looking at their phone. You were reading something. No dramatic conversation was happening. No romantic music was playing. And suddenly, they looked over at you and smiled. You asked, "What?" They shook their head. "Nothing." "Then why are you smiling?" They looked at you for a moment. "Because I used to think love was supposed to feel like fireworks." You smiled. "And now?" "Now I think it feels like this." They looked around. The quiet room. The ordinary afternoon. You sitting beside them. No fear. No grand speech. Just that. No fear. And my child, that was the revelation. The person you were searching for was not necessarily the person who would create the strongest emotional storm. The deeper connection was the one that eventually taught both of you how to live without one. That is why I want you to be careful about confusing anxiety with love. If someone constantly makes you question where you stand, that uncertainty may feel intense. But intensity is not always intimacy. If someone keeps disappearing and returning, that cycle may feel powerful. But instability is not proof of destiny. If someone makes you feel like you must earn basic affection, that is not the love you should spend your life chasing. The person meant to walk beside you may still challenge you. They may disagree with you. They may frustrate you. They may have flaws. But beneath all of that, there will be a foundation. Truth. Respect. Effort. And peace. That is what you should watch for. And there was one final thing your soulmate needed to understand. They needed to stop treating your patience as something they were entitled to. So one night, they looked at you and said, "I know you waited for me." You looked away. They continued. "And I don't want you to ever feel like you have to wait for me again." You looked back. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I ever become afraid again, I need to tell you. I can't make you pay for wounds you didn't create." Those words were different from every promise they had made before. Because they were not promising perfection. They were promising accountability. And that is far more valuable. They reached for your hand. "I don't want you to spend your life wondering whether I am choosing you." Then they smiled. "I want you to know. My child, remember that sentence. Because love should eventually become knowable. Not because you can predict every tomorrow. Not because you receive supernatural guarantees. But because someone's pattern becomes consistent enough that you no longer have to question their intention every day. That is what you were beginning to experience. And perhaps you are wondering now, what happened after that? Did they stay? Did the relationship work? Did everything become perfect? No. Life did not suddenly become a fairy tale. There were disagreements. There were difficult days. There were moments when old fears returned. There were nights when one of them became quiet. But something had changed permanently. They talked. They returned. They apologized. They tried again. And that is what made the difference. A soulmate is not someone who guarantees a life without conflict. A soulmate, in the deepest sense of this story, is someone willing to face conflict without abandoning the connection every time things become uncomfortable. Someone who chooses repair over escape. Someone who chooses truth over appearances. Someone who can look at you and say, I was wrong. That person is rare. And that is why the identity of your soulmate cannot be reduced to a name. You can meet thousands of people. You can feel chemistry with many. You can be attracted to several. You can even love someone deeply who is not meant to remain forever. But the person capable of building a life with you will reveal themselves through choices. Not fantasies. Not signs. Choices. And there is another secret I want you to carry with you. Sometimes your soulmate is not the person who enters your life when you are at your best. Sometimes they meet you when both of you are unfinished. That does not mean you should tolerate unhealthy behavior. It means that growth can happen alongside love. Two people can meet before they are fully ready, and still become ready together. But only if both are willing to grow. That is the difference. You cannot grow for someone else. They cannot grow for you. And if you are the only one changing while they continue hurting you, that is not a soulmate story. That is a lesson. Never confuse the two. Your soulmate is not identified by how much pain you can endure for them. Your soulmate is identified by how much truth both of you are willing to bring into the relationship. That is why I want you to stop asking, how much can I tolerate? Ask, can we build something healthy together? That question will protect your heart. And if the person you have been thinking about is truly capable of being your partner, they will eventually welcome that question. They will not demand blind faith. They will build trust. They will not ask you to ignore their behavior. They will change the behavior. They will not ask you to keep waiting indefinitely. They will make a decision. And perhaps that is the final shock. You thought the revelation would be about discovering who your soulmate is. But the deeper revelation is discovering what your soulmate looks like in action. They are not simply the person who says, I love you. They are the person who learns how to love you. There is a difference. And once you understand it, you will never look at relationships the same way again. Because you will stop being impressed by temporary intensity. You will start recognizing consistency. You will stop chasing mystery. You will start valuing clarity. You will stop asking why someone cannot choose you. You will start noticing who chooses you without being forced. That is maturity. That is discernment. And that is what your soulmate was learning. The final test came months later. An opportunity appeared that could have taken them away from you. A new job. A new city. A new beginning. The old version of them would have disappeared. They would have made the decision alone. They would have assumed distance was easier. But this time, they came to you. They sat beside you. And said, I have an opportunity to leave. Your heart tightened. You asked, what are you going to do? They looked at you. I don't know yet. Then they smiled. But I know I'm not making this decision without talking to you. Do you understand what had changed? They had not promised to stay. They had not promised to choose the relationship over everything. They had simply included you in the decision. That was growth. They were no longer protecting themselves by excluding you. They were respecting you enough to let you into the uncertainty. And you talked. For hours. About dreams. About fears. About distance. About practical realities. About what both of you wanted. And eventually, you made the decision together. Not because destiny forced it. Because two people chose it. That is when your soulmate became unmistakable. Not when they first looked at you. Not when they first felt attraction. Not when they first missed you. But when life gave them a reason to choose convenience, and they chose communication instead. That is who your soulmate really is. Not simply the person whose heart recognizes yours. The person whose choices can stand beside that recognition. My child, if you are waiting for someone like this, do not become desperate. Do not lower your standards because you are afraid of being alone. Do not call every painful connection destiny. And do not believe that losing someone automatically means you lost your soulmate. Sometimes losing someone is protection. Sometimes distance is redirection. Sometimes a closed door is mercy. And sometimes someone returns because they have finally become capable of opening the door properly. You will know the difference. Time will reveal it. Their actions will reveal it. Their consistency will reveal it. And most importantly, your peace will reveal it. So tonight, if there is one person on your mind, do not immediately declare that they are your soulmate. Instead, watch. Watch what happens when they are challenged. Watch how they communicate. Watch whether they take responsibility. Watch whether they respect your boundaries. Watch whether their actions match their words. Watch whether you feel more like yourself around them, or less. Because the right relationship will not require you to disappear in order to keep it alive. You will not have to become smaller. You will not have to beg. You will not have to constantly prove your worth. You will be able to breathe. And perhaps that is the greatest sign of all. Peace. Not the absence of problems. The absence of constant fear. That is what your soulmate was learning to give you. And that is what you were learning to give yourself. So when they finally stood beside you, months after the first confusing encounter, you looked at them differently. You no longer saw the person who had once pulled away. You saw the person who had faced the reason they pulled away. And they looked at you and said, "I think I finally understand why I was so afraid of you." You smiled. Why? They answered, "Because you made me realize I couldn't keep living the way I was living." You became quiet. They continued. "You didn't save me. You just made me uncomfortable." They laughed. "No. You made me honest. And my child, that is the kind of connection worth paying attention to. Not because it guarantees forever. But because it produces truth. It produces growth. It produces courage. And if someone can walk into your life and inspire those qualities without controlling you, without destroying your peace, without demanding that you abandon yourself, then you may have found something precious. Something worth protecting. Something worth building. Something worth approaching with wisdom rather than desperation. So if you have been asking me who your soulmate really is, perhaps the answer is not a stranger whose face you have never seen. Perhaps the answer is someone whose heart is slowly learning how to meet yours. Perhaps you have already crossed paths. Perhaps they already know your name. Perhaps they have already wondered why you affect them differently. Perhaps they have already fought feelings they could not explain. Perhaps they are still gathering the courage to come forward. But remember, you are not responsible for making that happen. Let them choose. Let them act. Let them grow. And if they truly belong in your story, they will eventually understand that love cannot remain hidden forever. The person who once feared losing control may finally realize that love was never about control. It was about trust. The person who once feared rejection may finally realize that silence was creating the very loss they were trying to avoid. The person who once believed they needed someone perfect may finally realize that what they needed was someone real. And perhaps that is who you are. Not perfect. Not without flaws. Not without your own fears. But real. And perhaps they are learning to love that reality. So don't be afraid of the ending you cannot see. Do not force the middle. Do not obsess over every sign. Live. Grow. Become stronger. Become wiser. Protect your peace. And let the person meant for you rise to meet you where you are. Because the right person will not ask you to abandon yourself to keep them. They will meet you as an equal. They will learn you. They will respect you. They will choose you. And when they finally do, you will understand why all those confusing moments had to lead somewhere deeper. You will understand why the silence happened. Why the distance happened. Why the fear happened. Not because every painful moment was destined. But because both of you had something to learn before you could build something worth keeping. And then one day, you may look back at the beginning and realize something astonishing. The person you thought was ignoring you was actually trying to understand why they could not stop thinking about you. The person you thought was walking away was fighting the urge to come closer. The person you thought had forgotten you was carrying your name into conversations you knew nothing about. And the person you thought might never choose you was slowly learning how to choose without fear. That is the revelation. Not that love was guaranteed. But that something real had been happening beneath the surface. And if it is meant to become something lasting, it will not remain beneath the surface forever. It will come into the light. Through words. Through actions. Through choices. Through consistency. And when that happens, my child, you will not need to convince yourself. You will know. Not because someone on the internet told you. Not because a sign appeared. Not because you were desperate for an answer. But because the person standing beside you will finally be showing you the answer through the way they live. So rest tonight. Let your heart breathe. You do not have to solve your entire future before morning. You do not have to know the exact name. You do not have to chase the person. You only need to remain open to what is healthy, honest, and real. And if the person you have been wondering about is truly meant to walk beside you, their journey toward you will eventually become visible. They will stop hiding. They will stop running. They will stop asking whether they are ready. And they will begin doing the one thing that matters most. Choosing. Choosing you. Choosing truth. Choosing growth. Choosing love that can survive ordinary days. And when that happens, you will finally understand why this message found you. Because the question was never simply, who is my soulmate? The question was, who is capable of loving me in the way my heart deserves? And now you know what to look for. Not perfection. Not obsession. Not chaos. Not endless uncertainty. Look for courage. Look for consistency. Look for honesty. Look for peace. Look for the person who does not merely recognize your value, but behaves as though they recognize it. That is the person worth watching. That is the person worth knowing. That is the person who may eventually become your greatest love. And if they are already somewhere in your story, let time reveal them. Let truth reveal them. Let their choices reveal them. Because when the right person finally stands before you with nothing left to hide, you will not have to ask who they are. Their love will have already answered. My child, your soulmate is not simply the person your heart cannot forget. Your soulmate is the person who, after understanding what you mean to them, chooses not to run. And when they finally stop running, they will realize something you already knew. They were never searching for a perfect person. They were searching for a place where they could finally be real. And somehow, they found it with you. If this message touched something inside your heart, do not leave silently. Write one simple word in the comments. Amen. Not because writing that word guarantees a particular person will return. Not because a comment can control your future. But because sometimes you need to make a quiet declaration to yourself. That you are ready for a love built on truth. That you are ready to release confusion. That you are ready to stop chasing what does not choose you. And that you are willing to trust that what is truly meant for your life will meet you with clarity, courage, and peace. And if there is someone specific in your heart right now, you do not have to reveal their name. Just write, God, if it is meant for me, bring it to me in peace. Let those words be your prayer tonight. And if you believe that the right person will recognize your worth and have the courage to choose you, write, I am ready for real love. My child, may you never again confuse anxiety with love. May you never mistake someone's inconsistency for destiny. May you never beg someone to see what is already valuable. May you never lose yourself trying to be chosen. And may the person who is truly meant to walk beside you have the courage to meet you in truth. Let what is false fall away. Let what is unhealthy lose its hold. Let what is genuine become clearer. And let the love that is meant to remain be built on honesty, respect, patience, courage, and peace. You do not have to chase it. You do not have to force it. You do not have to fear losing what is truly capable of staying. What is real will reveal itself. What is healthy will bring peace. What is genuine will require courage. And what is meant to become your story will not need you to destroy yourself to keep it alive. So breathe. Release the fear. Release the obsession. Release the need to know every detail tonight. Your future does not need to be solved in one evening. Let tomorrow come. Let time speak. Let action speak. And let love prove itself. Because the person who is truly ready for you will not merely say that you matter. They will live as though you matter. And when that day comes, my child, you will understand why you had to wait. Why you had to grow. Why some doors closed. Why some people left. Why some connections failed. Why some answers took longer than you wanted. You were not being forgotten. You were being prepared to recognize the difference between something that only feels intense, and something that is truly worth keeping. And when the right person finally stands beside you, you will not have to wonder whether you are enough. You will know. Because you will no longer be begging for love. You will be standing inside it. Amen.